just came from Europe this afternoon, just a few hours ago, and Baruch Hashem, we're back to our normal schedule of Harbotzes Torah. So many times before the Shir, I dedicated a Shir to Eloi Neshama. Today I want to dedicate the Shir to a very happy occasion, and the Shir is dedicated to the young couple, Rabbi Yamin Rosengarten, who dedicates so much time and energy to this Shir, to put everything together, and his daughter got married this week. I don't remember the names, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows the names. So we're learning Torah tonight. Shazivu Gyal Yofa, and their parents should have so much nachas. And so this is a bracha to Rabbi Yamin Rosengarten and his son. Sheyivnu Bayis Godel B'Yisrael, Ba'avo V'Achva V'Sholom V'Reus. So this week's parsha is Parsha Shoftim. Shoftim.
Daniel.
The chassan's name is Daniel?
Yeah.
Daniel Ben?
Younger.
Mother. So, Kodesh Baruch Hu knows Daniel Rosengarten. Sheyivnu Bayis Godel B'Yisrael, Ba'avo V'Achva V'Sholom V'Reus, B'Simcha V'Nachas. And his parents should have so much nachas. Shoftim v'shoitim titnu v'chol shorecho asher Hashem elokecho noisen l'chol shvotecha v'shaftu asua mishpat tzedek lo yisata mishpat v'lo yisak yeponim v'lo yisikach shochad ki ha-shochad ye'aver einei chachomim v'yisaleif divrei tzadikim. This is the topic we will be discussing tonight. Shochad, the ISSUR of shochad. Kosav HaShulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat Siman Tei Sif Aleph. And the Shulchan Aruch is based on the Rambam, Hilchos Sanhedrin, Perek Chov Gimel, Halacha Aleph. The Rambam writes that a person that took shochad, a dayan, lezakoi says a zakai. Not only if he took shochad to intentionally do ivus adin and to obstruct justice, even if he has intentions to give the right psak. But if he took shochad, he has to give back that money. It is only if the person that gave shochad, either the claimant or the defendant, how is the claimant called? Plaintiff. Either the plaintiff or the defendant. It is only if they demand their money back that the dayan has to give that money back, and that's a big chiddush. But before we understand the chiddush, why is it that it's dependent on the claim of the person that gave the shochad? We need to understand what is the basic source and understanding that if you took shochad, you have to give that money back. How do we know that the dayan, the judge that took shochad, has to give that money back? There are two different interpretations that we find the Divrei Gedolei Achronim. The Bach, the Gro, the Nesivis, Oves U'Olam. They say that this Rambam, quoted also in Shulchan Aruch, is based on the Machlokes Abai and Rava in Tmura Dav Daled. Kol milsa diyom rachmana lo tavid, I oved mahani or I oved loy mahani. And Rava says, I oved lo mahani. So I oved lo mahani is not only that if you do a kinyan or a chalais or a froshes sumas amaisis in a improper way, in a way that involves an ISSUR, that it doesn't work. It's not chal. It's invalid. Even if we're not dealing with a chalais, you cannot benefit from an avera. And any benefit that was acquired or achieved by avera has to be undone. And that is the concept of kol milsa diyom rachmana lo tavid I oved lo mahana. And that is the interpretation of many achronim, including the Bach, the Gra, and the Nesivis. That is the source that a dayan that took shochad has to give that money back. So even if the din is over and he can no longer rectify if he did anything wrong, the din is botel and mevutel. The psak is invalid. But we're dealing now with a monetary issue. Is it gezel biyudoi? Does he have to give that money back? So the reason he has to give the money back is kol milsa diyom rachmana lo tavid I oved lo mahana. The problem with this interpretation is that the Lecha Mishnah and the Noida B'Yehuda and many others interpret Shittas Rambam that the Rambam paskins in accordance to Abaye I Oved Mahani, and the psak is not like Rava, the I Oved Lo Mahani. Interpretation number 2 would be based on the Pnei Yeshua in Bava Metzia Daf Nun Vav. Bava Metzia Nun Vav is the sugya of Oinoah. So if you cheat another person intentionally or even without intention, and he overpays, then if it's more than a shtus machzer Oinoah, you have to give that money back. And the Pnei Yeshua asks in Bava Metzia Daf Nun Vav, how do we know that if you took more than a decent price, that you have to give that money back? By Hashavas Aveda, we have a mitzvah to say, Hashav Tashivim. Hashavas Gzeila, V'Heshavas Gzeila, Asher Gozel. By Geneva, Chaim, Shnayim, Yishalem. By Anoah, we don't have any source. So the Pnei Yeshua says, but if the Torah asks Anoah, then Anoah automatically becomes Gezel. Because if you have no right to take that money, and you took money, which you have no right to take, then it is Gezel. So the mitzvah say of a Heshav Zegzel Asher Gozel applies, even though you didn't take it by violent force, you didn't assault another person, you didn't grab it out of his hands, but it still is Gezel. Because if this is not legitimate, according to the Torah says, Loi soinu ish es amisoi, then it falls into the category of Gezel, and the mitzvah say of a Heshav Zegzel Asher Gozel applies. But I think even if we do accept the interpretation of the Pnei Yeshua, there's a big difference between Shochad and Oinoah. Because Oinoah is not money you took by force. It's not Gezela, it's not even Geneva. But the person that gave the money gave it by mistake. And he did not intend to overpay. So it is reasonable to argue that would be defined as Geneva or Gezela. But by Shochad, he knew why he's giving this money. And he decided out of his free will to give this money. It's an Aveira, but why would that be Gezel? And if it's not Gezel, how do we know that the Dayan has to give back this money? So even if we do accept the interpretation of the Pnei Yeshua Gaba Oinoah is much closer to Geneva and Gzela than Shochad. I think Shochad would be more similar to Ribis. It's an Aveira, but there was no lack of intention. The person that took that loan knew what the conditions are, what he is undertaking to pay, and he did so out of his free will. And by Ribis, we need a pasuk. Sheribis tzutze yoitze b'deyonam. We learned that from V'chayu chicho imach. By Shochad, we don't have a pasuk. So how do we know by Shochad that one has to return that money? And my basic argument is Shochad is different than Oinoah, because the person that overpaid had no intention to pay more than the proper price. He did so, the money wasn't taken by deceit, it wasn't taken by force, but still, this is not money that he intended to pay. So Shochad would be more similar to Ribis. And by Ribis we see that if not the posek v'chai uchichu imach, we would not be machadish that the person that took Ribis has to pay that money back. So my understanding would be, I think this is a fundamental argument, and I say the same lagabi Shochad, shelo kedivrei Pnei Yeshua. Any money that you took in an unfair way, you need to return. And those are shnei tzodim shaloisa hamedbeya. It's one and the same. If you can't take, you need to give back. Any money that you get and it's not legitimate, you need to give back. Because the fact that he paid has no significance. He shouldn't have paid. And you were not entitled to take that money. We don't need a pasuk that a person has to return what he got in an unfair or illegitimate way. So one might ask, so why do we need by Geneva v'Gzela pasuk? Maybe we don't. Maybe we do. Maybe this is what we learn from V'Heshav Zegzel Asher Gozel. And V'Heshav Zegzel Asher Gozel teaches us a fundamental principle in Mominus, that if you were not allowed to take that money, you have to give it back. And that is across the board. By Geneva, by Gzela, by Shochad, by Oinoah, by everything. Or maybe we don't need V'Heshav Zegzel Asher Gozel only to learn the halachos of Sheni Koina, of Kol Gezlon and Mishalmin Kishas Gzela, various different halachas that we learn from the Pasuk Ve'esel S'Gzela Asher Gazal. We need Lavanitikala Asay, but the fundamental principle is a simple one. If you're not allowed to take money, then you have to give that money back. So why do we need a Pasuk by Ribis? I think Ribis would be different than Shochad, than Ainoah. It even would be different than Shochad. Because Ribis is an ISSUR on both parties, on the loiva and on the malva. So the interpretation of the ISSUR Ribis can't be Ribis is like Gezel. Why would there be an ISSUR on the loiva to pay? By Shochad, the ISSUR is only on the dayin. The person giving the Shochad is over on the Fnei sitting Michshol. But the lav is loy sikach Shochad. And this lav we find twice in Parshas Mishpotim in Chumash Shemois and in Parshas Shoftim in Chumash Devarim. So Shochad is only upon the person that takes the Shochad. So this is money that is illegitimate. Ribis, the same that applies to the loiva as to the malva. And this is a very fundamental question. There's an interesting tshuva in Chasam Sofer. Chelik Vav Simacha Vav, Tshuvas Chasam Sofer. The Chasam Sofer says that even if the Torah would not ask a ribis, ribis has no basis. And the loiva would not be required to pay ribis, even if he promised to do so. Because there's no reason for the loiva to pay ribis. It's illegitimate. So even if the Torah wouldn't ask the ribis, there would be no chiyuv to pay ribis. That is what the Chasam Sofer says. And why not? Why not? So the Chasam Sofer says, why is it different than schiras? The Chasam Sofer wasn't aware of Tshuvas HaRashba, Tshuvas HaMiyuchosas LaRamban. So for many years, these Tshuvas were printed, Tshuvas HaMiyuchosas LaRamban. But today we know, it has nothing to do with the Ramban, it's Tshuvas HaRashba. It is called Tshuvas HaMiyuchosas. Tshuvas HaMiyuchosas in Reish Chov Gimel. The Rashba makes it very clear. If the Torah wouldn't ask a ribis, it would be totally legitimate, like it is in the modern world. I mean, schiras batim, schiras poyalim, schiras kalim. You wouldn't expect another person to give you his house to live in if you don't pay rent. You wouldn't expect another person to give you his car. You rent a car, you know that you need to pay. And so we find in halacha, schiras kalim, schiras batim, schiras poyalim. So ribis be'etzem is schiras of mine. In the modern world, I mean, some tzaddikim, gimelas chasodim, lend money without taking interest. But in the business world, it goes without saying. Why would you expect anybody to give you a loan without paying interest? So in the modern world, interest is just like rent. I mean, you don't expect to receive a house to live in for a year without paying rent. So why would money be different? So the Chasam Sofer says, no, but in a house there's pras. You know, when you live in a house, there's maintenance, and you break things, and that is why you need to pay rent. But by money, I mean, you took money, you give back the same money, so the lender had no loss, he incurred no loss, so why does he deserve to get interest? That's Chasam Sofer's argument. But it's a pella because schiras batim and schiras poyalim and schiras kalim is not because of pras, but shimush. I mean, why would you expect to derive benefit and usage of something that is not yours without paying for it? So the Chasam Sofer is a gewaltige chiddush, the understanding of the Chasam Sofer that the reason you need to pay rent, whether it's schiras batim or schiras kalim or even schiras poyalim, is because of prat. It has nothing to do with prat. Why would a person work for you without being paid? So just like you need to pay for an employee, why should he work for free? Why should he give you his house for free? Why should he give you his car for free? So why should he give you money for free? So the Rashba makes it very clear. If not the Torah Asa Drebis, it would be totally legitimate, just like schiras of any other thing. That's in Shuvas Rashba. If the Chasam Sofer would be aware of the Rashba, he would accept the understanding of the Rashba. And I think the Rashba was right. And the ISSUR of ribis is on the loiva and the malva. So ribis is somewhat more of a gzeres hakosuv, and therefore, if not we have a source that Ribis Tutsi Yoitz B'Diyonim, we would say it's innocent to give it Ribis, but B'Diyevet, if you gave it Ribis, money-wise, it's legitimate. The ISSUR is more of a Yoredeya ISSUR. But SHOCHAD definitely is illegitimate. And that is why SHOCHAD is only on the dayan, on the recipient, not on the person giving the SHOCHAD. The person that gives SHOCHAD is over lifnei yivol, is michol. But the ISSUR is only, and therefore I say, any money that you had no right to take needs to go back to its proper owner. Only ribis would be an exception. That would be my interpretation. Of the Rambam, where is the source that a person needs to give back shochad? And the fact that the Maggid Mishnah and the Lechem Mishnah didn't look for a source, and many times they say, we need to understand why the great Nesachim of the Rambam didn't deal with this question. So according to interpretation number 1, Yovid Mahana, or interpretation number 2, the Pnei Yeshua, they should have said that. So the reason everybody is quiet about it proves that my interpretation is the correct one. And obviously to them it was a simple slaughter. If you can't take this money, you got to give it back. And to me that's two sides of the same coin. If you can't take this money, it's actually not yours. It's illegitimate. So this money needs to go back to the proper owner. Only ribis is different, because ribis we see that ISSUR is not only on the recipient, it is also on the giver, on the payer. And from the monetary point of view, from Toras HaMishpot, ribis would be totally legitimate, because it's schiz, like the Rashba explains. It's only exeres hakosov. So therefore I think ribis would be different. And why would it be dependent if the person asks for his money back? Because both the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch says, Tzorach lachziroi lekeshiyit ve'eno. So why would that be dependent on the Tviyah? The Sema and the Taz have a machlokes with the same principle, that the Chiyuv to give back Shochad applies only if the giver of Shochad, the Baldin, asks for his money back. Would that apply to ribis as well? According to the Sema, no. The Sema and Chosh Mishpat Siman Tes. Siman Tes, Chosh Mishpat, is the Siman that deals with Shochad. And the Sema there says, Shochad is not the same as ribis. Ribis you need to give back regardless. Did he ask for it or not? The Taz says the same. And the Taz is twice. Chosh Mishpat Siman Tes and the Siman dealing with Shochad. And Yoredei Kuf Samach HaRav, the Siman and Yoredei dealing with ribis Ktsutzi Yoitz B'Diyonim. And the Taz says, the ribis, the same, just like Shochad. We could understand this map, according to what I explained before. Ribis, Shochad are not the same. Ribis is more of a Yoredei Dekeden. But still, what is the fundamental understanding regarding Shochad? If you need to give this money back, why would it be dependent on his claim? And why would the dayan need to return this money only if the one that gave Shochad requires and asks for a refund? He asks for his money back. Here once again we find different approaches b'divrei gedolei ha'achronim. The Bach, the Levush, the Tumim, and the Nesivas, gedolei olam, all say that if he doesn't ask for his money back, obviously there's mechila. And if he's moichel, he's moichel. There's a machlokes the Rambam and the Goinim whether mechila is valid regarding ribis. But maybe ribis is different, because ribis is not so much a monetary claim as I explained before. Because as a monetary claim, it's a proper schiris. But so these gedolei olam, the Bach, the Levush, the Tumen, and the Nesivas argue, if he isn't asking for his money back, then obviously it's mechila. And that's a taima. Because nowhere else do we say that if a person doesn't ask for money, probably he was meichel. Why would we assume that a person is meichel money that al pi din he is entitled to get back? We don't find a similar svara by Gizela or by Geneva or anywhere else. Moiche velokeach. Person sold something and the person didn't pay. He's entitled after 10 years, if he has proof. you bought something in my store you didn't pay, and even after 10 years, we do not say he was Michael. You need solid proof to argue that a person was Michael on a proper claim. So why would SHOCHAD be different than Gneva or Gzela or Mekach HaMemkar or Ksubah? Or Ksubah. Person gave a get. 15 years later, his wife comes to ask for Ksubah. If he cannot prove that he paid her Ksubah, he has to pay up. Nowhere else do we find that time proves Mechila. So why would SHOCHAD be different? So the Shah Mishpat tries to explain SHOCHAD is different, but it's not convincing. So this approach to say Mechila is not convincing. And the Shvus Yankev brings the Bach and is choilek on the Bach. So how does he deal with the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch? Why kishiyid ve'eno? So the Shvus Yankev is doiche the Bach, and he says Mechila doesn't make sense because nowhere else do we say that the fact that a person wasn't toiveya proves that he forgoes this money. No, we do not find that argument elsewhere. But the Shvus Yankov doesn't come up with an alternative reasonable pshat. And he says, all that Rambam means to say is that as long as the person that paid SHOCHAD is not toiveya, then Beis doesn't mix in. Beis doesn't take an initiative. If that's pshat in the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, Maika Mashmalan, what's the Revusa, Milsa de Pshita? In any civil claim, there is no process without the toiveya. So what is the Chiddush regarding SHOCHAD? SHOCHAD is a monetary claim. Just like in modern law, there are civil claims and there are mishpat plili. How do you say in English? Mishpat plili. Criminal courts. So when we're dealing with civil claims, there never is a legal process unless somebody claims. If there is no claimant, then there is no process. Then nothing happens. So why would this be different than any other dinam omenes? Why does the Rambam need to say here? I want to be miyashav the Shvus Yankov because here we're dealing with the court that did something improper. So maybe a higher court needs to intervene. It is not a claim between individuals, one person and the other. This is a dayan that took SHOCHAD. So there would be a tzad. Yes, the Beis Din has to intervene, and the Beis Din has to stop this, because this is not Pliny and Almighty. This is a person that paid SHOCHAD to a dayan, and therefore Beis Din should intervene and see that this goes back. Maybe that would be the Havamina, and that's why the Rambam needs to say, no, after all, it's a civil claim, it's a monetary claim. It's not criminal law, and therefore, likishiyit ve'emay. So this is what I would say to Mimiyas of the Shvus Yankov, but it still is a big Kiddush. Ktsois HaChoshen. Simetes, Sivkot Nalef, rejects the Shvus Yankov interpretation. I don't think he brings the Shvus Yankov, but he rejects his interpretation. And according to the Ktsois HaChoshen, as long as he doesn't claim, it's not only that there is no legal process, and Beis Din doesn't intervene, there is no chiyuv at all. Similar to Dina Knossos. You know, Dina Knossos are different than Dina Momenis. Dina Momenis, the Beis Din is not mechadish the chiyuv. The Beis Din just gives a ruling. In Dina Knossos, Asher Yarshi'un Elohim. As long as Beis Din doesn't paskin, there is no chiyuv, even if Nimishuas Adin. That is a fundamental difference that we find various different sugyas of Shas between Momenis and Knossos. But the Ktsois HaChoshen doesn't explain why. So how do we know, and what is the reasoning that by SHOCHAD we need a claim to create the etzem chiyuv? Why? Why? No. Kol kavonas Rambam is that there is no process. As long as somebody doesn't start the process without a claim. So I try to explain this to Yankov, maybe this would be different because this is not between one individual and another. This is a dayan, and therefore because it's a dayan, maybe Beis Din does have responsibility to stop this and to intervene even without a claim. Kamash Malon, kishiyit ve'eno, because at the end of the day, it's a monetary claim. It's not dina malchus, it's not dina misa, it's not makanois et shateitza nafshoy on a mitzvah say. It's a monetary issue, and therefore, without a claim, there is no process. So it's a choshim, drastically different, the other end of the spectrum than the Shus Yankov. The Shus Yankov says there's a chiyuv, but Beis Din doesn't intervene. So it's a choshim understands no, there is no chiyuv without a claim. But the choshim falls short of giving a suggestion why would that be. And once again, Lanias Daiti, Advarim Pshutim Betachlis, and I would say, it is only when a person took money without the consent of the Bailim that he has to give the money back regardless of a claim. But in any instance and in any circumstances in which I didn't force the person to take money, I did not take money without his consent, he gave out of free will and I took. In those cases, I do not have to give the money back unless he asks for his money back. And I think it's a svara pshuta. Yes, I shouldn't have taken this money, but after all, he gave it out of his choice, out of free will, with full consent. And therefore, if he wants his money back, I have to give it back. But as long as he doesn't ask for his money back, it is not upon me to give the money back if he doesn't ask for his money. And according to my understanding, the Taz would be right. Ribis would be the same as Shochad. Unless we say, Ribis is different, Ribis is Yoredeya. Ribis is an issue on the loiva, not only on the malva. And if it's Yoredeya, then Sorach Loi, he has to do tshuva. He has to do tshuva. It's not muminous. Maybe it's more Yoredeya, it's more Isaveta. I do not want to go into discussion, the fundamental discussion regarding Ribis. Is it Choshen Mishpat or Yoredeya? Because Ribis is not our topic today. Shochad is our topic. We just relate to Ribis in the interaction between Ribis and Shochad. Regarding Ribis, I wrote in Minchas Devorim. I apologize, I don't remember which siman. But in Minchas Devorim, I wrote an Arichas on Ribis. It's interesting. The Rambam brings all Dina Ribis and Hilchas Malva V'Loiva and Sefer Mishpotim. The Torah writes Hilchas Ribis in Yoredeya. And some Gedolim want to say this is a fundamental difference, a machlokes between the Rambam and the Torah. Is Ribis a Choshen Mishpat Dika Halach, or is it Isavet, or is it Yoredeya? I think that's a mistake. Because the Torah, when he writes Hilchas Ribis in Yoredeya, starts with an apology. Why do I write Hilchas Ribis in Yoredeya? They're supposed to be in Choshen Mishpat. So the Torah explains, because in Siman Kuf Nun Ches and Kuf Nun Zayin, there are various halachas in which we find the difference between Yisrael and Goyim. And a Ribis there also is a chilik between Yisrael and Goyim. The Ribis applies only to your brethren, but from a Goy you're entitled to take Ribis, and that's why I write Hilchas Ribis in Yoredeya. So the Torah apologizes, but it's a shvacha hezbollah. It's actually a shvacha hezbollah. Because by Ribis there's a difference between Goyim and Yidden, that is why the entire package you put into Yoredeya, not into Choshen Mishpat, shvacha hezbollah. So one could still argue, it does prove that it has somewhat a kesher with Yoredeya. So I say this many times to my Talmidim, and I think most Rosh Hashivas and Maybe would not agree with me, but that's my feeling. I think even though the Rambam does write Hilchas Ribis in Malva V'Loiva, and the Torah apologizes why it's in Yoredeya, it still could be a din of Isavet or not Choshen Mishpat. Not only in the Torah, even in the Rambam. The reason it should be in Choshen Mishpat is not dependent on the essence of ISSUR Ribis, but after all, ISSUR Ribis is Dina Malva V'Loiva. So it should be in Dina Malva V'Loiva. It's as simple as that, regardless of what the essence of the ISSUR is. After all, it's a sugya of Malva V'Loiva. That is where Hilchas Ribis should be. So my argument is, so some Rosh Hashivas, some Gedolim say, according to the Torah, it's Yoredeya. According to the Rambam, it's Choshen Mishpat. The counter-argument would be, no, even according to the Torah, it's Choshen Mishpat. He apologizes why it's in Yoredeya. And I say, maybe even according to the Rambam, it's Yoredeya. So why is it Hilchas Malva V'Loiva? Because where should it be? After all, it's Dina Malva V'Loiva. So it should be a dina malva v'loiva regardless of the mahus, of the essence of the ISSUR. So to me that's a milsa d'pshita. And I think there are many mistakes and many wrong conclusions derived from why does the Rambam write here and not there. And I think the Rambam's approach in dividing up the halachas and where he placed the halachas is based more on the practicality than on the mahus, on the essence, on the panimias, and the lamdas of the halachas. So, coming back to my understanding, so why by shochad do you have to give shochad back? Only if the person that gave the shochad wants his money back. I think that is the fundamental rule. When I took money, bal korcho shalodam, or not even bal korcho, even oinoa, without consent, then it is upon me to give that money back. But if the money I got was in full consent of the person that gave the money, yes, I have to give it back, but let him ask for his money back. I didn't take it against his will. He gave this money out of free will, and therefore it is not upon me to give the money back unless he asked his money back, and that is when I'll give it back. So according to my understanding, the Taz is right. Ribis and Shochad would have the same rule, and we would say the same by Ribis. Unless we say, Ribis is Yoredeya. And I definitely see room for the argument, Ribis is Yoredeya, not only according to the Dur, even according to the Rambam. And this is an extremely powerful argument. The same ISSUR is upon the Loiva as the Malva, which proves it's more ISSUR v'heter than a monetary issue. Unless one would still argue, and this argument, once again, is valid. I'm aware that today I say Dova ve'pechoy a few times and everything is valid because zeh emes lani is daiti. Yes, ISSUR Ribis is upon the Loiva and the Malva. But I still feel it's be'ikar on the Malva. But because of Chumras ISSUR, and because the Loiva is so much weaker than the Malva, by human nature. When a person is pressed and he needs money, he is in an inferior status to the person that has that money. And that is why people go to extremes, suicidal extremes. And they take upon themselves to pay 10 and 20 and 30 and 40 and 50% ribis a year, which is impossible and unjustified and horrendous. Because when a person is pressed for money, sometimes he will do crazy things to achieve that money. That is why the Torah asks on the loiva and not only on the malva. So it doesn't prove that the loiva and the malva are on par, the same. The ISSUR is upon both of them, but it still could be a choshev mishpat dikidin. So yes, dakas u'inyan. We're talking about nuances, but everything I said has mukim and svara. I hope everybody is following me with the dakus and the nuances that we said. So my basic understanding, where did the Rambam take, and what is the svara of the Rambam that you need to give shochad back likashiyat ve'eno? So my understanding is, even though I was not entitled to take this money, but the giver gave it out of his total consent and out of free choice, and therefore, yes, I will give the money back, but if he asks for his money back. So the same would apply to ribis, and ribis would be similar to shochad. Kishitas ataz, v'lo kedivrei asma. Unless the Sma would say, it's a Yoredeya Dikadin. Maybe it is Yoredeya Dikadin, even according to the Rambam. And l'chayra, the fact that the loiva has the same issue as the malva proves it's ISSUR v'heter and not choshev mishpat, but I don't think that's a raya gemura. Maybe the Torah asks on the loiva because of chumras advorim and because the loiva would do almost everything just to achieve that money, and the malva would do almost anything to get those compounded horrendous ribis, and that's what the Torah needs to ask on the loiva as well as the malva. Chazon Ish, Sefer Emunah V'Betochen, and this is a fascinating Chazon Ish. I never feel comfortable arguing with the Chazon Ish. I don't know why. I'm more afraid of the Chazon Ish than of many others. Not afraid, but I have his battles. So the Chazon Ish writes in Emunah V'Betochen, An amazing argument. But Anias Daiti, Eina Dvorim came. So the Chazon Ish says, Shochad is min hachukim v'lo min hamishpotim. Chukim chukaktim. Gzeh esakos. Because those people who are emes ner leraglam, there is no havamina that shochad should affect their ruling and their svara and their opinions. Why is a person kosher to paskin isaveheter for himself? Whether it's Hilchas Nida, whether it's Hilchas Basa B'cholav, he has an agia. He has an agia. It's his meat, it's his wife. So how could a person paskin isaveheter for himself? He has an agia. But there's no chashash that an agia would distort the ruling and the svara and the judgment of a Talmud Chochem Yerei Shamayim. So why would the shochad be different? Argues the Chazon Ish. It is only because the Torah asks shochad, because it's a dova meguna, and with the Torah asks shochad, only then a shochad ye'avar einei chachomim v'yisalav divrei tzadikim, because the Torah asks shochad. But that is not the reason that the Torah asks shochad. Kach kosav HaChazon Ish Sefer Emunah ve'betochen Perek Gimel. So first of all, I want to make a comment before I reject the argument of the Chazon Ish in 4 different ways, but a general comment. I think there is significance that the Chazon Ish writes this in Sefer Emunah ve'betochen and not in Chazon Ish Nezikin Choshe Mishpat. After all, Chazon Ish Emunah ve'betochen is not a sefer which is basically halacha. Even though in the Signon of the Chazon Ish wasn't a darshan, and I don't think the Chazon Ish in Agadah is different than he is in halacha. The Chazon Ish is the Chazon Ish everywhere. But I still think there is significance by the fact that this is in Chazon Ish Emunah ve'betochen and not Choshe Mishpat. Another point I want to make. I think the Chazon Ish has an agenda in writing this, and it's clear when we go through the entire Perek. The Chazon Ish says, some people have the chutzpah to argue against Talmidei Chachamim that they have negias, maybe they're not right, and that is a terrible approach, and totally destroys Kvod HaTorah and Kvod Chachamim, and the morals of Talmidei Chachamim. We need to believe that a Talmid Chacham has the ability to rise above negias. And therefore, when Gedol Yisrael or Talmidei Chachamim or Diyanim paskin, we need to accept their psukim with total submission and total humility. So I think the Chazon Ish is striving to a point. Generally, we need to bow our heads to the opinions, the attitudes, the psukim of Talmidei Chachamim and Gedol Yisrael. And that is why he argues that a Talmid Chacham has the ability and the yecholos to rise above personal negias. And that is why Be'isa V'heter he could paskin for himself. So why would shochad be different? It's not different. The Torah asks shochad because it's a dova meguna. And because the Torah asks shochad, Yisalef divrei tzadikim. לפי פשוטון של דבורם, כמה רחוקים מהדבורים, עם פשוטו של מיקרו, ולא סיכך שויכד, כי השויכד יעבר עיני חכמים ויסלף דיvrei tzadikim. That is the reasoning. כי. And Rashi writes, כי השויכד יעבר, משקיבל שויכד ממנו, אי אפשר שלא יתס לבבוי להפך בזכוסוי. Doesn't Rashi clearly say, משקיבל שויכד, אי אפשר. So according to the Chazon Ish, it's only after the Torah asad shochad. So what is the difference between shochad and any other negiah? Of course there's a difference. I think it's so simple. When you get shochad, it's not only the money. It's the fact that this person gave you shochad. He's a human being with a face and a name and a personality. and you appreciate the fact that he gave you money. It is different than an agia on a shalom treifus or bosa b'cholav or maris and hilchas niddah, in which, yes, you could derive benefit, but it's different. V'yor the Torah l'sov data shalom. That is human nature. That is human nature. So, when a psak affects your money, yes, a Talmud Chacham Meirei Shemayim could rise above that. But when a person gives you that money, that is human nature. You connect to the person, not only to the money, and you feel obliged, you feel indebted to him because he gave you his money. And I think that's such a simple svara. But it is not the only svara. Another argument would be based in Shani, because the Torah is makpid, nafka, on the legal process. So there's a saying, and it has a source in Droshes Haran. Hatzedek tzarich lehiraot, v'lo rak lehiyasot. How do you say that in English? Is it also accepted in English? Justice must be seen and not only administered. It needs to be obvious. And the Droshes Haran writes it on SHOCHAD, that the Torah asked SHOCHAD for two reasons. And the Droshes Haran explains, Ya'avrei nechachomim v'yasalev divrei tzadikim. Ya'avrei nechachomim means it will impair justice. V'yasalev divrei tzadikim, even if it would not affect the ruling, but it is awful that people might think that it impaired justice. That's a Droshes Haran explaining Kefal HaLoshoin, the dual language in the Posek. Yasalev Ya'avrei nechachomim v'yasalev divrei tzadikim. So the Torah is makpid b'yoisor and based in. It's similar to Shavuos Lamed Zayin. Shavuos Lamed Zayin, it is obvious from the sugya. Midvar sheketirchak, the Gemara gives 10 explanations, 10 examples, Midvar sheketirchak. From 1 to 10, they're all referring to based in. Person that lies to his friend is not over a midvar sheketirchak. It's a mida meguna, but it's not a lav. It's not a lav. The lav is only in a legal process, only in based. So we see from that sugya, the Torah is makpid b'yoisa and based in. And maybe that is the difference between ISSUR v'heta, which a person could paskin for himself, and SHOCHAD. The legal process in based in needs to be noki mekol revav. And that is why the Torah asks SHOCHAD. That would be explanation number 2. Explanation number 3. Giving SHOCHAD is a distortion of the process. It is resha, it is avel, it is aven. And that is why the Torah is makpid b'yoso. On the effect, because it's wrong. Argument number 4. B'de'i efshar lo pligi. After all, ed nechod nemon b'yisurim. Toysus explains 3 different places in Shas and Gittin Dav Gimel and Yevomis Peiches and Achulin. How do we know ed nechod nemon b'yisurim? Sharei heminu Torah kol echod ala shchita, ala nikor, ala froshes tumas and isis. It would be totally impossible if a person can't paskin for himself. Well, everything he will need to ask a dayan. That's efshar. But the efshar lo yikpid Torah. So there are so many different ways in which we could be machalik between ISSUR v'heta and SHOCHAD. And therefore, pshuto shel mikro. Lo yisikach SHOCHAD. Ki ha-SHOCHAD. Ya'avar einei chachomim v'yasalev divrei tzadikim. That is the reasoning. U'kemo shekosev Rashi. Mishekibel SHOCHAD mimeno efshar shelo yates levavoi. So the Chazon Ish deals with great people. Maybe he's right regarding the giants, Gedol Yisor, but not every dayan is necessarily a Gadol Ador. V'atorah hishvo midoiseo. The Torah can be machalik between a Gadol and somebody that's a lesser Gadol, so how could we be machalik? So the Chazon Ish argues, Anshei Emes, nothing in the world could distort their Emes. Maybe regarding the giants, he's right. He's right. But these halachas are across the board. They are uniform. And there could be no chilik between Ploini and Almaini. Two different dayanim. Is every dayan a gadol hador? And therefore, I think the argument of the Chazon Ish is a schwach argument, and I think he just wanted to make a point. And tzorach yin gadol b'dvorov lani is daiti. Pshuto shel mikro, pshuto shel divrei Rashi, pshuto shel inyan, and the argument ma bein issa v'heter l'shochad. I don't think it's a powerful argument. I think shno v'shno, as we explained. So, at the last chelik of this part of the shir, I want to address a very troublesome shaila. Is the HSukkah applicable only to Beis Din, or does it apply to officials? Whether elected officials or people that were nominated to their jobs, chavrei iriyah, chavrei vadot, vada mechuzit, dealing with the ishurei b'niyah. To our dismay, we're aware of what goes on. And if you want to get things done, usually there are ways to get things done. Is that legitimate? Does the HSukkah apply only to Beis Din? Two Gedolei ISSUR will address this question, many, but two of the greatest Gedolim. So the Perpulach Harifta and the Rosh, it's one of the Choshev Achroinim. So there's a story in Sanhedrin Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. Bar Choma kotel nafsha. Person named Bar Choma killed a person. Tragedy. So the Reish Gelusa asked Rab Abba Bar Yaakov to take on his case and to rule. Is he chayev or poter? And Rab Abba Bar Yaakov had two Eidim that testified, yes, he is the one we saw he killed. And then two Kitei Eidim came to Pasel, the first Eidim that testified to be Mechayev Bar Choma. And Abba Bar Yaakov wanted to Pasel Eidim number 2 and rule that he is Chayev. Rav Papi argued with Rabbi Abba Bar Yaakov and convinced him that the first cat are Eidim Psulim. And therefore, Bar Choma went out free person. And Bar Choma paid the taxes for Rav Papi till the end of his days. Out of HaKoros HaToivim recognition. He got him off the hook. So Bar Choma took upon himself to pay the taxes of Rav Papi. So the Rosh asks, why ain't that Ribbis? Why isn't that Ribbis? So SHOCHAD, not Ribbis, of course, SHOCHAD. Why wouldn't that be SHOCHAD? Even SHOCHAD Mu'uchar is an Issa D'Rabbanan. Even in retrospect, after the ruling paying SHOCHAD is still an Issa D'Rabbanan. So the Rosh says, because anyway a Talmid Chacham is poter mitashlum arnona. He was poter anyway. So the Perpulach Harifta asks, why would it be Shochad in the first place? That's only Knossos. In the days of the Ameroim, they no longer were Dan Dinamisa. So it's only Knas. So why would it be Shochad? It's not a proper ruling. So the Perpulach Harifta writes, this proves that the Issa of Shochad is also Memunam ala Tzibur, and not only a proper Beis Din. And he writes that Terchocham Megula on Memunam ala Tzibur Bismanenu, that they take Shochad and he attacks them, that's an Issa Gomer. So would that apply to officials? After all, it was a ruling. It was a criminal case. And it was somewhat of a Beis Din, even if it's Dina Knossos. But it still was a Beis Din. And this was a criminal offense. And the question was capital punishment, Dina Misa. So even if it's not a proper Beis Din, because B'yamei HaMeroim, Yeah, that is the authority of the Reish Gelusa. The Reish Gelusa in Bavel was the equivalent of the Nasi in Eretz Yisrael. So it still, in a way, was a court. And the question was, Chai v'misa, or Chai v'knosses. Is that the same as officials? So my feeling is maybe the Purpura Charifta also deals with Memunim ala Tzibur that administer justice, that administer judgment. That is what he means, Memunim. And the entire Revusa is, even though it's not a proper based in Al Pi Torah. So, if the Purpura Charifta means officials, elected officials that deal with monetary issues and not with rulings and not with judgment, Beinodam L'Chaveiroi, or criminal cases or monetary issues, then I don't understand his raya. Because after all, that was, in a way, it was a beis din. Chsam Soifer, Choshe Mishpatzim Kuf Samach, deals with a Rav that was elected by a committee, and it became clear in retrospect that the members of that committee got shoichet from the Rav's family. And the Chazanash and the Chsam Sofer rules that it is totally invalid. The decision of this committee to elect that Rav is totally invalid, and he is not the Rav. And if it will come to light that the Rav was personally involved in giving this shochet, he cannot be a Rav in his entire life. That's the psak of the Chsam Sofer. What is this psak based on? Sif in Shulchan Aruch, that kol oiskim im hatzibur yasku imam l'shem shamayim. I think it's a Mishnah novice, and if they get shochet, that is definitely not l'shem shamayim. Ki hashochet ye'avar ein chachamim. So the Chsam Sofer is very harsh. That's a very harsh ruling. And if the Rav was involved in that scheme, then he cannot be a Rav. So the Chsam Sofer would l'chayra apply to any official, because kol oiskim im hatzibur need to be oisik l'shem shamayim. One could argue, the fact that I took shoiched, does that mean it's not l'shem shamayim? I'm convinced everything I do is l'shem shamayim, but they wanted to give me money. Why shouldn't I take that money? So according to the Chsam Sofer, no, that totally contradicts l'shem shamayim, because the pasuk says ki shoiched yavar ein chachamim. So according to the Chazon Ish, Chsam Sofer isn't right, because the yavar ein chachamim is only because of the lav, and by public officials there is no lav, so there's no yavar ein chachamim. So I think this proves my argument. No, yavar ein chachamim comes before the lav. That is why the Torah asks SHOCHAD. So if you take SHOCHAD, it distorts your judgment, and you no longer have any degree of l'shem shamayim. And the Aruch HaShulchan, Siman Tes Choshe Mishpat Aleph, quotes the Chsam Sofer. He doesn't bring the source, but at the end of the Sif, he writes Chsam Sofer. And it's quite obvious, and he probably means this tshuva Chsam Sofer, because I'm not aware of any other tshuva besides Choshe Mishpat Siman Kuf Samach, in which the Chsam Sofer reveals us. So, according to the Chsam Sofer and the Aruch HaShulchan, and I think it goes without saying, I don't think that it's an ISSUR, the lav, ki hashochet ye'avar ein chachamim. The lav refers to beis din. Shoiftim v'shoitim titin l'cho b'chol sholecha. But nevertheless, I think it's an ISSUR according to the Chsam Sofer. Not only it's an ISSUR, but it is invalid. Whatever they decide is invalid. And maybe loisata mishpat is not only on the shoiftim, but on the shoitrim as well. Anybody that is involved in the process is loisikach shoichet. Ki hashochet ye'avar ein chachamim v'yasalev divrei tzadik. So the only shoifet that is allowed to take shoichad is shoifet kol ha'oretz, Kodesh Baruch Hu. Today is the Chodesh Elul, and we're looking for ways to be zoche b'din. Pay shoichad. Give a Kodesh Baruch Hu shoichad. Make him happy. Give him more Torah, give him more Tefillah, give him more Gemilas Chasadim. He's well aware that you're doing it because you want to bribe him. Because you didn't do it Av, you didn't do it Tammuz, you didn't do it Shvat, you didn't do it Nisan, you didn't do it Iyar. You're doing it Elul, but nevertheless it works. Because nobody tells HaKadosh Baruch Hu what he has to do. HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes SHOCHAD. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does very many strange things for us. So the Yerushalmi says twice, Masechet Sanhedrin, and once again in Sof Perek Hamid Shavuos, the Yerushalmi says, Ein shechacho lefnei kiseh kavodecha, b'shvil Yisrael na'aseh shachachan. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves his children, and sometimes he forgets about their past. How could HaKadosh Baruch Hu forget? If we say HaKadosh Baruch Hu can't forget, then we're limiting HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's a philosophical question. HaKadosh Baruch Hu forget. If we say he can't forget, is there anything HaKadosh Baruch Hu can do? Is there anything HaKadosh Baruch Hu can't do? So he could forget, but forgetting is a deficiency. So that's abstract philosophy. Could HaKadosh Baruch Hu forget or can't he forget? So the Yerushalmi says clear, when he wants to forget, yes, he forgets, because that is what he wants to do. So why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu want to forget? For our benefit, sometimes he chooses to forget. So for us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does anything. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes SHOCHAD. And we have to take advantage of that fact. Yes, it's Elul. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows that maybe after the Yomim Tovim we won't be the same. But right here and now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu waits for us to be better. Yes, it's Elul. Take advantage of the fact that it's Elul. So there are many Ramazim on Elul. Echad lechatos ve'echad la'oila is one remes. Es levavcho ve'eis levav, another remes. But the most well-known remes is ani ledoidi ledoidi. So a person might have a feeling, where do all these ramazim come from? Maybe a person was bored and he had some spare time. He took out a Tanakh and he started reading through the Tanakh. And wherever he found a posik that has the sequence of Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed, he made a note. And when he was through, he had a whole bunch of Ramazim and Chodesh Elul. That is not the way we relate to Kisvei Ha'ari. And all these Ramazim are based on Kidvei Ha'ari. The Ari HaKodesh wasn't bored, and he probably didn't have spare time for nonsense. So each and every one of these Ramazim has a profound meaning. And I think the most profound of them all is Ani ledoidi v'doidi li. And why do I think so? Because in our conscience, in our collective feelings, Elul is associated with Eimo v'yira, with Pachad. The Novi Amos says, Im yetoka shoifo b'yira v'am lo yechradu. And Minig Ashkenaz is to blow shofar from Rosh Chodesh Elul, from the first day in Elul. Im yetoka shoifo b'yira v'am lo yechradu. And the Gemara says, Lama ein oimeram halal b'Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim. And according to the Gemara, this is a question that Malach HaShuras asked the Kodesh Baruch Hu. When Kodesh Baruch Hu says, Efshar, Melech Yoshev al Kisei Adin, Sifra Meisen v'Sifra Chaim Tucham Lafon v'Yom Halal. And the Rambam brings this halacha, Perek Gimel of Hilchos Chanukah. The Rambam writes, Ein oimeram halal b'Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim lefi she'ein elu yomim shel simchi yasera, elu yomim shel yira v'fachad. So Yomim Neroim are Yomim of Yira v'Fachad, and Chodesh Elul as well. So the Ri HaKodesh says that the remez of Elul is Ani ledoidi v'doidi li. So where does this posuk appear? Not in Megillah Eicha, not in Sefer Iyov, not in Kisvei HaKodesh that are based on Midas Hadin. This posuk appears in Shira Shirim. Shira Shirim is not that much about Yira v'Fachad. Shira Shirim is a love story. And the Rambam writes in Perek Yud Mehilchos Shuvah, when the Rambam writes about Avodas Hashem me'ahava, and I always had the feeling Hilchos Shuvah has 10 prokim. I always had the feeling it's Keneged Aseres Yemei Shuvah. And since I was a young boy, a young bocher, not a little boy, I used to learn HSukkah from Rosh Hashanah and Leil Yom Kippur, Leil Kol Nidre. After davening, I always learned Perek Yud. And Perek Yud is a magnificent Perek. The entire Perek is dedicated to Avodas Hashem Ahava. And the Rambam writes, Loi kol hachachamim zocho lemida zu. And that's the Madrega of Avraham Avinu. The Novi Yeshayahu says, Zera Avraham Ohavi. The Kol Sefer Shir HaShirim nichtav kemoshe le'inyan hazeh. So Shir HaShirim is all about Ahava. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's love for us and our love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is the moshel of the Doid and the Rayo. And that is Chodesh Elul. So that's comforting, and that gives us so much chizuk. Elul is not about Yirah v'Fachad. It is a gift. Elul is a gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us before the Yemei Adin arrived. So there's a tshuva in Noida B'Yehuda. Noida B'Yehuda deals with the question, should an ovel daven for the Omid be Yemei Aslichus? Because the poskim say, and the sources are Divrei Kabbalah, and ovel should not daven b'Yom Neroim, because he's Ma'oyer Midas Adin. Midas Adin is Shoira Ana Ovel. So he should not be Oiver of Neateva in Yom Neroim. So how about Slichus? And the Noida B'Yehuda says, Slichus is Kulei Rachamim. Has nothing to do with Din. Din starts in Rosh Hashanah. Yemei Slichus are Kulei Rachamim. Elul Kal V'Chomer, Kulei Ahava. And that is Oimek HaRemez of Ani Ledoidi Li, which is encouraging, and it gives us chizuk. Elul is a gift. Take advantage. It is a gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us ba'ava u'b'chemlo. And there's not a shemetz of midas adin in Elul. It's all about ahava and about rachamim. And that is why the remez is ani ledoidi v'doidi li. Ani ledoidi v'doidi li. This posuk appears in Shir HaShirim in two different variations. In Perek Beis of Shir HaShirim, the posuk says doidi li v'ani loi. It is only in Perek Vav in Shir HaShirim that we find ani ledoidi v'doidi li. What is the difference between the two variations? Fundamental difference. Medrash Rabo Eicho, Perek Hey, we learn in Medrash that there is an eternal argument or discussion between Kodesh Baruch Hu and Knesset Yisrael. We plead with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, Hashivenu Hashem Alocha v'Nashuva. Kodesh Baruch Hu says, no, it doesn't go that way. Shuvu Elai v'Shuvu Aleichem. Many times I told the story of the Rav HaRav that Chassidim tell. So the Rav HaRav was one of the great tzaddikim in Poland, in Galicia. And it once transpired was a cold and wet, rainy winter day, and the Rav HaRav was sitting in a wagon pulled by two horses, and one of the wheels got stuck in the mud, and the Balagola goes out and huffs and puffs and pushes and pulls to no avail. So he walks over to the Rebbe's window, he knocks on the window, and he says, Rebbe, I'm fully aware it's a pasnish, but if you do want to get home at some time, maybe come out and let's push together. You know, I know that it's inappropriate, but if you have any other idea, I'm willing to hear. I'm not successful in getting this out of the mud. So what could he do? He looks around, he goes out and both push together. Still doesn't budge. So the Rav HaRav noises Einav Lamorem, and he says, Rabbeinu Shalom, I believe in Hashgacha Pratis, and I know that you got me stuck in the mud, you want me to do tshuva. But how could one do tshuva when it's cold and he's shivering and he's up to his knees in the mud? Please bring me home, you know, I'll have a hot cup of tea and I'll do tshuva. Ultimately, I'll do tshuva. And the Chassidim knew that the Rav HaRav called Dvarav b'moshel u'b'melitza, and he wasn't talking about his personal travails. He turned to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he says, I believe we're stuck in the mud for thousands of years because you expect us to do tshuva, but you see it ain't working. You're not getting anywhere. Because we're stuck in the mud and we're so uncomfortable and we have so much tzoros, then we should be doing tshuva, but you see it ain't working. So bring us home, you know, bring us home and then we'll do tshuva. That is our argument. Hashivenu Hashem Elocha v'Neshuva. So if it would be up to us, we would have no Chodesh Elul. We would have Chodesh Dalul. That's how we would prefer to call this Chodesh. Al Shem HaPosek Doidi Li, and only then Ani Loi. But there's not much we can do. It's Chodesh Elul. It's not Chodesh Dalul. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu skipped Perik Beis, and he went directly to Perik Vav. Ani Le Doidi, and only then Doidi Li. So we do need to make the first step. And that is why Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us Chodesh Elul. Try. Kinderlach, try. I'm giving you Elul before the Yemei Adin. Elul es kuloi rachamim. Elul es kuloi ahava. Try. Take advantage of this month. I'm giving you a full month before Rosh Hashanah, before Seder Yemei Tshuva. Make the most of it. The Kodesh Baruch Hu pleased with us. And after all, what does the Kodesh Baruch Hu expect? Peacefully Pesach Kechudoy Shal Machat. And everybody remembers what Chazal say. Everybody says, "Ani eftach lan Pesach Pesach Shel Ulam." No, that's nowhere in Chazal. It's the Shlo, and in Tfilas Tashlach. But in Chazal, we do not find that lashon. What we find is far more appealing, and it's a medrash in Shir Hashirim. Peschu li Pesach kechudesh ol machat, v'ani eftach lachem psochim shiu agolos v'kroinos ofrim behem. And I say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't deal with empty wagons. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't deal with empty wagons. And if HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, ani eftach lechem psochim, not one Pesach, but many psochim, shiu agolos v'kroinos ofrim behem, those agolos and kroinos are jam-packed. They're full of bona chayim, mezoyne rovicha, nachas and simcha, and barias gufa, v'nohira ba'alya. All HaKadosh Baruch Hu demands and asks for is Pesach kechudosh shel machat. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yes, he says, ani ledoidi, and only then, doidi li. Hashivenu Hashem Elocha v'Neshuva. He says, shuvu elai v'oshev aleichem. But he's not asking for too much. He's asking for a Pesach kechudosh shel machat. So let us take advantage of Chodesh Elul. Let us try to bribe HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Let us try, at least Elul, take advantage of this matona that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. Ani ledoidi v'doidi li berachamim merubim. So we should take advantage of Chodesh Elul and try to be better. Tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, talmud Torah, kol ha'maver al nedoisa maviran lo al kol pshua. These are the sgulas that we should try to plead with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and take advantage of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yiratzon. We should all have together with Kol Beis Yisrael Aksiv v'chasim etoiva b'sifron shel tzadikim gemurim. And this new year coming upon us, yesh shnas oiro, shnas brocha, shnas geula v'yeshua b'bias goel tzedek v'mheiro v'yomeinu. Amen.